Rules and Reference Committee to order. The purpose of today's hearing is to review Council's July Reimagining Safety legislative package. This package is comprised of a charter amendment to establish a Civilian Police Review Board and a Department of Inspector General, legislation on demilitarization, on hate group and background checks, and on no-knock raids. On June 25th, my colleagues and I held a press conference to announce what we plan to do in the next month. That day, we told folks what we plan to do, we told the public when we plan to do it, and I asked that folks hold us accountable for the work that lay ahead. We have heard an unparalleled amount of feedback since June. More than 1,000 pieces of written testimony, more than 100 public speakers, more public hearings in a month than I have ever remembered in my 6 years on council. The purpose of today's hearing is to provide council members a chance to discuss these various initiatives and hear additional feedback from the public. I'll go over the agenda briefly before providing Safety Chair Mitch Brown the opportunity to provide opening remarks. First, we're going to hear from Councilmember Dorrance and we'll provide background regarding the charter amendment to establish a police civilian review board and an independent investigatory agency. Then, General Counsel Laura Baker Morrish will provide a presentation on the text of this charter change. Council members will then have the opportunity to ask questions and discuss. Second, we will hear from President Pro Tem Brown regarding demilitarization. Third, we will hear from Councilmember Favor who will present background information on the hate group background checks and some of the legal considerations. And then fourth, we'll hear an update from Councilmember Emmanuel Remy regarding no-knock warrants and raids. After council members have had an opportunity to discuss these various initiatives, we'll hear public testimony and then adjourn the hearing. We plan to vote on these various initiatives this Monday, July 27th, at our regularly scheduled council meeting. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over to our safety chair, Councilmember Mitch Brown.
And thank you, Council President. Over the past few months, the City Council and Mayor Ginther have worked collaboratively with the Division of Police to implement policies and structures that reflect the values of our community. This afternoon, you will hear from my colleagues on the significant progress we've made on the creation of a civilian review process, limitations on the use of no-knock search warrants, ensuring our division does not become militarized, and policies that ensure our officers do not have any affiliation with hate groups. I believe each of these policies are necessary to bolster the public's confidence and trust in their division of police. Over the past decade, our division has made great strides in improving its engagement with the community, promoting de-escalation techniques, and adopting the recommendations of President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. However, our mission to reimagine public safety will continue to require patience, vigilance, and investment to guarantee success. I look forward to the information being presented today and will continue to engage with my colleagues on the work to ensure every Columbus resident feels safe and supported regardless of their zip code. With that, I turn it back over to you, Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, I'd like to move into our first topic for the hearing, a charter amendment to establish a Civilian Review Board and Department of Inspector General. I will turn things over to my colleague, Councilmember Dorrance, who is going to walk this legislation through today and on Monday. Councilmember Dorrance.
Thank you, Council President Harden, and I appreciate Chair Brown as well for holding this hearing today for us to update the public on what we've been working on over the past month. We need to build trust between the community and the Division of Police. Based upon these past few months, I think that's evident to nearly everyone. As Council began this process to reimagine public safety, I know I personally have heard from thousands of people that believe the creation of a Civilian Review Board is a vital aspect towards building that trust between the community and the Division of Police. Establishing such a board with subpoena powers and a professionally staffed investigative unit outside of the Division of Police to review uses of force incidents and citizens' complaints is a necessary step that I believe we can take to move forward with while creating a process that is fair and transparent for both of our citizens and our officers. Last month, as Council President mentioned, this body stood together at a press conference and I committed that day that council would codify Mayor Ginther's executive order requiring use of force incidents to be investigated by an outside independent agency. I'm proud to report that council passed that legislation several weeks ago. However, I said then, and I'll say again today, that legislation was a short-term measure. We need true independence when it comes to investigating complaints of misconduct within the Division of Police. Independence that the community has confidence in, and independence that the community trusts, not just simply another law enforcement agency that looks and sounds like the system that so many have lost faith in, but something that we can trust to conduct a fair and independent investigation to the benefit of both our residents and our officers. Recently, City Council held a nearly 5-hour hearing on the topic of civilian review boards, why they're important, what they look like across the country, and how this might look here in Columbus. In that hearing, we heard from the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission, the Division of Police, and national experts. The National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement shared with us the ways in which communities have established effective oversight bodies that have served both the interest of the community and officers. Over 150 cities in Ohio and across the country have worked with their officers and their unions to create a civilian oversight body. There is no reason we can't achieve that here in Columbus. One of the key principles that national experts have shared with us is the need for trust and legitimacy in the creation of a civilian review board and independent investigative body for both the community and officers. Without this, efforts to establish meaningful review boards have often not achieved their goals. That is why it's so important for us to get this right here in Columbus. City Council, the Mayor, the City Attorney, and many others have devoted countless hours over the past month working towards a charter amendment that seeks to create a new system in which the community and our officers can have faith in. Building on the advice of national experts and our engagement with the Community Safety Advisory Commission, the Division of Police, and the community, we believe that we have found the right foundation that is legally sound and respectful of collective bargaining rights, but is also focused on community expectations and the values in order to build that legitimacy and trust that we need. This charter amendment is structured to ensure that it can be implemented under the current collective bargaining agreement in place between the city and the Fraternal Order Police. However, the ability of the Civilian Review Board to play a larger and binding role in police discipline will need to be negotiated with the union. I mention this because I believe that we as council and we as a city need to be upfront and radically transparent about what the charge of this board will be in the short term and our vision of how it can build trust between the community and officers in the future. However, make no mistake, it's time for the city to put in place a structure to confront this issue head on. I'd now like to turn it over to City Attorney Chief Counsel Laura Baker Morris to present the legal aspects of the ballot language of the proposed charter amendment. Laura?
Thank you, Councilmember Doran, Chair Brown, President Hardin, for the opportunity to speak here today regarding the charter amendment proposed language. Next slide, please. As Councilmember Doran mentioned, City Council will be voting on this final language on July 27th, and the amendments of the city charter must appear before Columbus voters. Essentially, the city charter is similar to the U.S. Constitution, but for the city of Columbus. The charter is the ordaining authority for all acts of local government within the city of Columbus, and to change the charter is similar to having to execute and vote on a constitutional amendment. And so just like a constitutional amendment would have to be voted on by the various states across the nation in order to change the U.S. Constitution, similarly for the city of Columbus, if we want to change something in our charter, it must be voted on by the citizens. As a result, provisions that are in the charter are designed to provide the framework for how laws should then be enacted by individual council members as the future comes to light. And the charter is supposed to set out the broad framework and the provisions that establish how local government is structured. Specifically today, we're talking about the Civilian Police Review Board, and the charter amendments today will set out that framework that ordinances in the future could then be added to in order to provide the specifics as to process and to additional levels of authority or duties as the future decides are needed and are required by acts of council. Next slide, please. As proposed, there are 4 sections They are all related to one another, and they establish the broad terms by which this board would act. Next slide. Provision number 1 is Section 215, Civilian Review Board, establishing the board. It states that there shall be a Civilian Police Review Board, which shall be comprised of an odd number of members, a majority of whom shall constitute a quorum. It's important that there be an odd number so that we have the ability to break ties when there is a vote. A majority being a quorum just sets out some of the basic rules under which this particular board will function. What you will notice is not addressed in the particular amendment is how those individual members will be selected. That's because that's reserved for the group that is meeting together right now, the Citizen Review Advisory Group, to flesh out the specifics that would then be enacted in council ordinances to make the specifics as to process and to how the board shall be constituted based upon the community's desires and the community's research. The second provision in Section 215 states that the members shall be representative of the diverse communities within the City of Columbus on the basis of race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, religion, disability, ethnicity, age, socioeconomic status, and geographic region. Once again, laying out the broad strokes of which the board will be constituted, but again, not getting into the specifics as that's going to be left to that advisory group. Next slide, please. Continuing on with the basics of the review board, this provision requires that the funding be established and that it will not be able to be easily maneuvered downward in future generations. Funding for the Civilian Police Review Board shall be appropriated on an annual basis in an amount sufficient to pay for the personnel services and other expenses necessary for the effective operations of the board. Annual appropriations for the Civilian Police Review Board shall not be reduced unless financial circumstances dictate an overall reduction to the city's budget, in the event of which the annual appropriation for the Civilian Police Review Board shall not be reduced in an amount disproportionate to the overall decrease in city expenditures. In other words, if we have a situation like we do right now with COVID-19, and we're looking at the possibility that the city's budget might be significantly impacted based upon what has occurred over the last number of months, such that we would be looking to decrease potentially the city's budget, we would be able to do that for the Civilian Police Review Board, but we would not be able to single out the Civilian Police Review Board for reductions while we allow other agencies or other departments to continue to be fully funded. The point here is to make sure that whatever reduction has to occur because of that significant financial circumstance would be fairly apportioned among the departments, and that that could not be used as an excuse to eliminate effectively the board. The mayor shall set forth the basis for any reduction in writing to council and the Civilian Police Review Board at the time of submission or adoption, as applicable, of any budget or budget modification. So not only are there standards in the charter amendment to establish when such a reduction could occur and limit what that reduction would be, there's also oversight over the ability to determine what that reduction would actually be. The mayor would set forth the basis for the budget reduction, as the mayor commonly does. It has to go to both council and the Civilian Review Board at the time of submission, and they get to weigh in on that budget modification. Next slide, please. Section 216 is fairly simple. It just sets out the terms of office for the Civilian Police Review Board members. It shall be 4 years. Once again, the specifics of how members shall be chosen, whether or not those particular terms of office will be staggered, how an individual member might be able to be removed or replaced, or if the position is vacated, all of those specific things can be addressed in additional ordinances in the future. Next slide, please. Section 217, this is the heart of the duties and responsibilities of the board. The Civilian Police Review Board shall receive, initiate, cause investigation of, and recommend resolution of complaints filed with it or initiated by the board alleging misconduct by sworn members of the Columbus Division of Police. The idea here is that even with the existing FOP contract that requires the investigation at this particular point in time to be done within the Division of Police, the Civilian Police Review Board will be able to participate in that process by receiving and or initiating those complaints, referring them for investigation, monitoring that investigation, and then making recommendations as to how those investigations are resolved. Again, if there is a contract negotiation with the FOP and the contract terms change, this provision of the Charter Amendment will allow for the expansion of those duties to potentially in the future include the ability to investigate those complaints themselves and or to recommend and or implement discipline. At this point in time, that's something that is not permitted by the existing FOP contract, but this provision of the Charter Amendment acts as a placeholder for that should that be negotiated. And at this point in time, these steps can be taken even with the existing contract. Upon completion of investigation, the board shall make recommendations to the Division of Police regarding resolution of the complaint, and where warranted by the facts, may make recommendations pertaining to discipline. Once again, the role of the Civilian Police Review Board at this point in time, and as stated in this proposed charter amendment, will be to make recommendations within the existing chain of command and the existing discipline structure as required by the current FOP contract. Next slide, please. The Division of Police shall make available its records relating to any matter under investigation, review, or evaluation by the board, subject to the restrictions of applicable federal and state law. This means that there is a belief that there will be a relationship between the board and the Division of Police, such that the division has an understanding that it's required to make available its records for review by the Civilian Board of Review. The board shall also have the authority to request the attendance of witnesses and the production of documents, photographs, audio recordings, electronic files, and other tangible evidence relating to any matter under investigation, review, or evaluation by the board, subject again to the restrictions of applicable and federal law. When those provisions state applicable federal and state law, we're talking, of course, by the rights of individuals to assert their Fifth Amendment to not commit Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate themselves. Hard to get that out today. There are also provisions of the FOP contract and provisions of state law pertaining to collective bargaining that limit certain requirements to compel individuals and witnesses to testify. So we did not list out all of those here, but we made it very clear that the board does not have the authority to override federal or state law. Next slide, please. With the approval of the city attorney or the city attorney's designee, the board shall have the authority to request that a subpoena issue to compel the attendance of a key witness or the production of any documents, photographs, audio tapes, electronic files, or other tangible evidence relating to any matter under investigation, review, or evaluation by the board in accordance with relevant provisions of the charter, subject to the restrictions of applicable federal and state, and for city employee members of a bargaining unit, the terms of any collective bargaining agreement. Once again, the specifics of this and the process by which this could be used will be fleshed out in ordinances to be suggested by the working group that's working on the Civilian Review Board and will be augmented by acts of council. The requirement of the city attorney approval here is to assure the legality of that particular request. Obviously, when you're getting to the point not merely of asking for records, but of seeking a subpoena in order to compel them, you have to determine whether or not you can do so within applicable state and federal law. And the approval of the city attorney is designed to assure that that is being done in accordance with those provisions and the provisions of the charter as well as the collective bargaining agreement. Next slide, please. Subject to the approval of council, the Civilian Police Review Board shall make rules providing for the procedure of the board and for the review of complaints filed with it. This is not uncommon for a commission or a board to make sure that they have procedural rules about when they meet and how they vote and how they take minutes and things of that nature. The rules of the board and the amendments thereto shall take effect within 15 days after their publication in the city bulletin. Again, this is similar for other boards and commissions within the city. And the board shall perform such other duties not inconsistent with the provisions of this charter as may be required of the board by ordinance. Again, that's the specific provision in the charter amendment that contemplates that there will be additional ordinances passed by city council that will require them to then perform duties and give them additional authorities as required by those additional future ordinances. Next slide, please. Okay. So the first three provisions that we went over discuss the Civilian Police Review Board itself. And what's kind of clear as you see all of them read together is that what the Civilian Police Review Board is designed to be is a group of individuals that act in a quasi-judicial mode. In other words, they hear cases, they make recommendations, they make decisions on information that is presented to them. The Department of the Inspector General for the Columbus Division of Police is the full department of which the Civilian Police Review Board is a part. Now, this is distinct from being part of the Department of Public Safety or the existing and current Division of Police. This is its own department, the Department of the Inspector General. Within that, the Inspector General themselves and investigators, administrative support staff, and the Civilian Review Board constitute the entire components of that department. So the way that this works is not dissimilar from a number of committees and boards that exist across the state. For instance, you have the Ohio Ethics Commission, is a commission that is a board of members. They have a director. That director has investigators. The director and the investigators investigate the cases, conduct all of the, issue the subpoenas, conduct the interviews, and then they bring that information, and it's the commission then that makes decisions about that. It'd be a similar situation here. Another situation in the city that's similar to this is the relationship between the health commissioner and the Board of Health. The Board of Health is the ultimate deciding body within the Columbus Public Health Department, but the health commissioner and her staff are the ones that do the actual work and bring the information to the board for the board to review and make decisions on. It would be a similar situation here. The overall department would be the combination of both the board and the Inspector General's office, and the Inspector General and his or her employees would do the work of conducting any potential investigations that might be necessary. The Inspector General shall be appointed by a 2/3 vote of the Civilian Police Review Board and confirmed by the mayor to serve a 5-year term. This once again allows at a certain level of independence from other departments within the city, in that this is not simply an appointment of the mayor. This person is appointed by the board. There is confirmation by the mayor just to assure that that individual, for instance, might meet any criteria that the working group might establish for who can be an Inspector General. But it's the decision of the board, and then once that Inspector General is placed in that position, they serve that 5-year term, absent, again, any ordinances that would describe means for being removed from office should they engage in malfeasance or simply don't do their job. The Department of the Inspector General shall be independent from the Department of Public Safety, and the Inspector General shall serve under the guidance of the Civilian Police Review Board. Again, this makes it very clear that while their role is to conduct investigations within the Division of Police, they are not part of the Department of Public Safety. They are their own department, and they work collaboratively with the Civilian Police Review Board. What you will notice is that there are not any specific duties prescribed to the Inspector General in this particular amendment. That is intended so. This is something that going forward and in engaging in conversations and negotiations with the FOP, we have to determine the limits and the ability of the Inspector General to perform these functions. But this once again provides the framework for those particular duties to be assigned to the Inspector General going forward by acts of council. And I believe that's everything. And so if there are any questions from any members of council, I'm happy to answer to my best of my ability.
Thank you, Chief Counsel. I want to ask a couple of clarifying questions, and I think you did a great job sort of walking through the nuts and bolts of the amendment itself. And I think you've already answered these questions, but I just sort of want to highlight them a little bit more for members of the public that may be tuning in. When we talk about the difference between having folks vote on a charter amendment, so putting something within the Constitution of the city versus just filling it in, or creating the body utilizing standard ordinances of the city. I wonder if you could talk about from a legal aspect why that's important from a structural perspective, looking 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the line.
Right. So unlike a general ordinance of council, if you have a change in the administration or if you have a change in members of council, any other group of council members could vote easily to repeal an existing ordinance within the city. The charter, however, is different. Just as it takes a vote of the people in order to amend the charter in the first place, it would also take a vote of the people in order for the charter to be repealed or for another amendment to come along and take its place. About the only way that a city charter can possibly be overridden is if there's a court or judicial determination that it somehow is in conflict with either the Ohio Constitution or the U.S. Constitution. In other words, it's not something that can be easily changed. it is likely and probably will outlast the existing administration, the existing members of City Council, existing officials, and be something that's a bit more permanent.
Thank you. And I wanted to, again, ask you sort of another question, sort of for you to underline sort of the interplay between the board itself and the Inspector General. This is something that we had a lot of conversation with national experts on, and with certainly folks internally at the city, sort of the distinction between the two bodies and why it's important to have both. I think as we've talked to national experts in which there's just been a civilian review board in place, but there hasn't been that investigatory component about issues that can arise in that kind of situation. So I was wondering if you could, again, when you talked about that being sort of a quasi-judicial body, maybe for the non-lawyers out there, sort of talk about how that body itself, the Civilian Review Board, what kind of decisions it's making and why that investigative component is very critical for it to do its job.
Okay. Absolutely, Councilmember Dorans. The difficult thing about boards is that you want them to be able to represent a cross-section of the community, to have a diversity of experiences and locations. And in order to do so, that means you need a large number of people on that board in order to perform, to give you that diversity of experience and background. But that's not an easy group or an easy way to conduct an investigation. The reality is, in order to conduct an investigation, you really need one person who's kind of in charge, who can determine who needs to be interviewed, what evidence needs to be gathered, what steps need to be followed up on. And boards like this don't meet on a daily basis. They meet often either on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. And the logistics of trying to have a large number of people make discrete decisions about specific cases is just simply unwieldy. The best way in order to assure that the board has all the information they need is to task somebody else with gathering that information. So that individual would be the Inspector General's office. They would go out, they would conduct the investigation, bring all the information, and then they would bring it to the board to present to them. Here's what we found. Here's what we think has happened. Here's the information that we have. And if the board has any questions, the board can say, well, I understand what you have, but I'd like to see some more. I'd like to see maybe this document, or I'd like to hear from this particular witness. And can you bring me that information so that we can make a decision about what we would recommend doing about this situation? So that's what I'm saying when the board acts in a kind of quasi-judicial manner. What I mean is that they are having information brought to them, and then the board amongst its members decide what that information means to them and what their recommendations should be. And so that's how the two different entities function. Inspector General is more practical, out there actually gathering stuff, interviewing people. The board is more deliberative. They're making the decisions about what to do with that information and what to recommend to the division.
Thank you, Chief Counsel. Those are the only questions that I have. Happy to go around the virtual dais here and see if any of my council colleagues have any. President Pro Tem Brown?
That mute button is so tricky sometimes. It's a floating mute button. Really poor design. Thank you, General Counsel. That's the title, right? Yes, thank you. I really appreciate
finally got that one right.
I know. I really appreciate the work that you've poured into this, along with the council team and the mayor's administration, to set forth a charter amendment that really lays out the importance of an independent body. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time in answering my questions leading up to Monday. So Councilmember Dorans, I don't have any additional questions at this time, and simply wanted to express my gratitude.
Thank you very much. It's been an interesting time.
Councilmember Mitch Brown?
Thank you, Councilor Dorans. General Counsel, just a general question here. Who has the final say on discipline?
So as it exists right now, because of the FOP contract, the final say on discipline lies with the chief of police and the public safety director. This board, as currently constituted, would be able to make recommendations to the Division of Police, either at the chief level and or at a lower level, depending on what kind of investigation we're talking about. But the ultimate decision as to actually implementing discipline would still, at this point in time, lie within the division, specifically within the chain of command, the chief of police, and if it's a higher fire decision, with the public safety director.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Dorns.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. And I guess one quick point of clarification in that same vein. So even if the FOP contract were to change, in which the sort of recommendation aspect would be changed, the Inspector General would still be housed and live outside of both the Division of Police and the Department of Public Safety to ensure independence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Favor?
Thank you to Councilmember Dorans and Council President Harden, General Counsel Laura Baker. Thank you for this very thoughtful presentation, all of the work that you all have put into getting this up and running. I wonder if we can just, for the viewing audience, there's been a lot of announcements made in the city of Columbus over the past month. And I'm wondering if you could just clarify what group is actually working to create the Civilian Advisory Group. Did that question make sense? Because there's a couple different groups operating. So
yes. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, there are currently two distinct groups that have been named. There is a group that I'm sure Chief Quinlan can speak to, who is the Citizen Advisory Group to the Chief. And that group was named close in time to the next group. And so I'm just making it clear that they're two separate groups. That group of individuals is to assist Chief Quinlan looking currently at directives, policies, practices, and procedures, specifically regarding use of force. The second group that, as I understand it, was named is a group that was designed coming out of the the Safety Advisory Council, coming out of the Safety Advisory Council recommendations. This group is supposed to be designed to look at what we want the Civilian Police Review Board to look like. So that would be the series of ordinances that would lay out the processes and the nominating of who's going to be actually on the board, and how they're going to interact with the Inspector General, all of that, so that there would be a working group, and that group has already been named, and that their work would be to kind of flesh out of this based upon this framework, what the board will actually do and how they're going to do it. And then once that's done, should the citizens vote and approve this particular piece of legislation, then come late November, December, then actual members of this Citizen Police revised Citizen Police Advisory Board, Civilian Police Review Board, see, this is the problem. Civilian Police Review Board would actually be named at that point in time. So three separate entities. You've got the Chiefs group, you've got the working group right now to figure out what the rest of the board is going to look like and do, and then you've got the actual board who would be appointed pursuant to the processes and procedures laid out by the working group, and that wouldn't happen until closer to December, January.
So is the idea for the working group right now to fill in those gaps that you all have carefully made available for resident feedback, input, guidance? Is it the idea to get that all filled in before the November election?
Yes, the idea is for that group to make a series of proposals or recommendations. Ultimately, they don't have the authority to actually enact those things. So the idea is that they would go over the recommendations from the Safety Advisory Council. They would go over the best practices that exist, information from Nicole heard from in the public hearings, and then decide what recommendations to council to actually enact ordinances to take their ideas and implement them into law. So they can be working during this period of time while these matters
And then finally, some of the feedback that we learned last week during the actual hearing for this legislation really centered around the frustration with these review bodies and not having the positive effect that many residents want to see when it comes to reimagining public safety. And so for residents who have some apprehension about this review body and to Councilmember Brown's question of who has the final decision, how do we reconcile those two competing thoughts, and have we perhaps addressed some of those concerns in our legislation?
I think, the fact is that we are limited by the existing FOP contract, and we have to recognize that is a union with which the city bargained for these particular terms. And so we have some limitations on how far we can go. However, that's not to say that we can't do anything, and it's not to say that we can't do some of these things even while we're attempting to renegotiate the terms of that contract. What this charter amendment allows us to do is to put together at least the framework, as I said before, for what that entity could be. And honestly, that entity could be what the city makes of it. So as their tasks set out before them. You have the opportunity to have oversight with this particular board. You're going to have the opportunity to monitor. That gives a certain level of transparency to the investigatory and administrative actions of the Division of Police. And that gives you a certain level of power to make recommendations, not true power in the sense that you can't control the discipline, but you can certainly bring to light what's going on and raise those concerns. And I think that's a very important part. Civilian police review boards are as good as the members are dedicated to being on the board. I mean, it's just like any other organization. You have some organizations that have the same structure in one state as another state. In some states, they're incredibly impactful and they're meaningful because you have really dedicated board members, and you have a city, or you have an entity that they're working with that is receptive to their ideas. And in other places, you have individuals that get assigned that maybe don't do the same level of work, and maybe it's not as effective. That's something to be seen in the future. But what I can say is that this is an opportunity now, with all the movement and everything that we've seen in the community and how angry people are. This is a place to take that anger and move it into action. This is a place to come forward with ideas about how to make this Citizens Review Board work for our city, and this is the time to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. That's all I have, Councilmember Dorrance.
Thank you, Councilmember Favor. Councilmember Reamy.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorrance, and certainly thank you, Councilmember President Hardin, General Counsel. Appreciate the hard work that you've put into this. I think that this is a strong piece of legislation that really meets the what we've been hearing from our residents, and certainly things like the Matrix report and the Safety Commission. So definitely am supportive of what the proposal is and look forward to voting affirmatively on Monday. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. I'd like to turn it back over to Council President Hardin, who's been my partner on moving this legislation forward in council. And just want to thank him personally and his staff for all the hours that they've put in on this. So with that, turn it back over to Council President Hardin.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for the partnership, and to your staff as well, Kevin McCain and Zach Davidson, Laura, Mike Brown, Chief Ken Paul, I think were the folks who spent a lot of time, I guess, virtually on phones and conversations and getting us this far. Laura, just one more time, Chief Counsel Baker, on discipline. We got this question last night from a community group. Why not just put it in the charter? That's our Constitution. Wouldn't that just overrule anything that we would negotiate if it's in our Constitution? I think. No. Yeah. Could you explain that to folks?
I'm sorry. No, it would not. So there are provisions of Ohio law that regulate collective bargaining agreements, and what they make clear is that if the subject that you are intending to regulate is a mandatory subject of bargaining under the collective bargaining law, then it doesn't matter if you change your city ordinance or if you change your charter, you still must subject that to bargaining. And so the easiest way to think about this is that if you have an agreement between the city and the union, then that agreement, with very few exceptions, is going to trump any law that you pass that attempts to get at these mandatory subjects. Mandatory subjects of bargaining are basically issues that relate to how one is employed and how one is disciplined within their work. So you can change a law in terms of, police officers shall, enforce speeding violations or something like that, because that's about how they do their job. But if you're talking about how they are employed, how they have, what benefits they have, whether or not they're disciplined, whether or not they're suspended, whether or not they're fired, whether or not they're promoted, those are the kinds of things that are mandatory subjects of discipline. And mandatory subjects of bargaining, and discipline falls clearly into that bucket. So if we were to enact a charter provision that says the Civilian Police Review Board shall mete out all discipline, we can enact that, but it will have absolutely no legal effect when we try to implement it, because we would still, as a city, have to bargain for that, either under the existing contract as a midterm bargaining issue or in contract renegotiations with the FOP. And that's the reality.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you for your work on this. And thank you to my colleagues for their consideration, deliberations over the last week or so as we work to bring this before the public. And to Councilmember Favor's point and to Chief Counsel's point, there is still a lot of work to do on this. We purposely left a lot to the committee that is meeting now to fill in the gaps, because we want citizen engagement. Those are the representatives of our community. And truthfully, as we got into it, we realized how much work there actually is. There are so many nuances in creating this, and that deserves the time and consideration that a group will take over this next several months. And council looks forward to receiving those recommendations and moving those forward as we receive those as well. So we appreciate it and look forward to feedback over the next several days before our final vote on Monday on this ordinance for the amendment to be put to the ballot. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our next presenter, which is Council President Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown, who's going to talk about her demilitarization conversation package and where that is.
Great. Thank you so much, Council President, and appreciate everyone's involvement in this forum tonight, for you and Councilmember Brown in calling it and giving us an opportunity to present what we're doing individually as this package of efforts. You know well the hard work that I know all of us have put into this, but I'd like to, as I start here, just really call out the hard work of my team. Kelsey Ellingson and James Carmine. People usually thank at the end of their remarks, but I'm putting it right at the top because I want everyone to hear just how thankful I am and their names. Kelsey and James have done incredible work to help put together what we will be putting forth as demilitarization ordinances on Monday. I've been very thankful for the work of Matt Erickson and John Oswald in the Legislative Research Office too. So I want to start by emphasizing sort of some key values. In the city of Columbus, we strive to have community-based safety forces, or peace officers, as they're defined in code. For the protection of our residents and our officers, there should be a covenant. I spoke of this covenant at our hearing on June 30th about demilitarization. This covenant between our police and the people they serve that states we are on the same side. As we work to solidify that covenant, I believe a review of the equipment used by our police department is critically important. The use of certain equipment, from chemical agents to helicopters over homes, does put a strain on the trust that we must secure between officers and residents. And all of us as policymakers, we must uphold the covenant of trust by balancing the needs of our residents with the job we've asked our officers to do through the equipment that we purchase and utilize. So as finance chair, I held a hearing on June 30th to review our purchasing code with a specific focus on the equipment purchased and utilized by the Division of Police. We began our review through an executive order from President Obama, which established a new standard for what kind of equipment local law enforcement agencies could purchase from the federal government, specifically military surplus equipment through their 1033 program. His executive order and the work of his task force on 21st century policing served as our foundation. Their work produced two lists, one of prohibited and one of controlled or restricted equipment. So that's where we started. And the hearing that we held was nearly 6 hours long. It included 4 full packed hours of public testimony. We also received more than 900 written comments, the vast majority of which were in support of efforts to re-examine the equipment we give police in an effort to demilitarize their presence on our streets, and to rebuild the covenant of trust and safety between everyday people and the peace officers we employ to keep us all safe from harm. Much of the testimony we received in person or over WebEx was really focused on the police response, not all of it, but much of it, to demonstrations and protests over this summer. Although it is important that we respond to these events, critically important, what I've tried to remember is we must not lose sight of what brought that protest movement into existence. And that is the everyday reality of many residents, especially in our Black communities, who have a strained relationship with police over the course of decades. That reality is what bubbled up into this real movement for civil rights and racial justice. We can't just focus on a response to recent events. We must look at that, and we also must focus on how we can make systemic and lasting change to address longstanding issues. Following the June 30th outpouring of voices, I also solicited feedback through personal conversations, many hours of it, with Chief Quinlan, leadership of the FOP, several subject matter experts within our Community Safety Advisory Commission, who I will just note have taught me a great deal over the time that they've existed as a commission about overall approaches to public safety, including the lifting up of real mental health resources baked into our safety forces. Based on our hearing, overall feedback, and information from the department, we are planning to consider the following actions at Monday's council meeting. So first, we're proposing a ban on the purchase of the following equipment. We don't own these ones that I'm going to go through. And by banning them, we are clearly stating that we're not in the market as the city of Columbus for these military style weapons. So those are tracked armored vehicles or tanks, weaponized aircraft, vessels, and vehicles of any kind. Again, these are all things that are available through the federal government's 1033 program because the Obama executive order was issued and then overturned. That was a key point I forgot, overturned by President Trump in, I believe, 2017. So these are things that are available to local law enforcement agencies. And we are taking the affirmative stance that not only will we not be purchasing them through the 1033 program, but we are not in the market for them, period. So again, tanks, weaponized aircraft, vessels, vehicles of any kind, firearms and ammunition of 50 caliber or higher, grenade launchers, manned fixed wing aircraft, and then one that is not on the Obama list, but that we heard a lot of feedback on was mobile phone signal blockers. Many concerns from our residents that these were being utilized during the protests. We don't own these. They were not being utilized, but they are going to go on our list of things that we will not purchase or use within our division of police. Then adding to that list of banned items, there are a few items that are currently utilized or in stock that we we are proposing a ban on: riot batons and camouflage uniforms. Now, moving from the banned list or prohibited list, we are proposing restrictions on additional equipment, as well as guidelines for their use. These items are pieces of equipment that, when used appropriately and by officers with appropriate and thorough credentialing, serve a specific purpose in very dangerous and high-stakes circumstances. So these are armored or tactical wheeled vehicles. So these are noticeable to our residents as a vehicle labeled SWAT on the outside and are helpful for hostage situations. We will propose restrictions on helicopters, such as the size of our fleet and their flight paths over neighborhoods. We'll propose restrictions on flashbangs and chemical agents and anything that can launch a chemical agent. Mostly, and we are working on these things continually. But mostly what we're seeking is high-level clearance for the use of this kind of military equipment, because I have heard in my conversations the specific high stakes and very dangerous instances in which these kinds of equipment need to be used. And if that is the case, then we want to seek the highest level of clearance to use them. But they don't have a place, obviously, in protests. But they also, we talked a lot about some of the dangers during Councilmember Remy's hearing of SWAT operations when there are pregnant women or children or vulnerable populations around. And so that is why high levels of clearance are so important, because of the accountability that it ensures, and also because of the decision making, that the clarity of decision making that can occur when you're not in the heat of the moment, but hearing about the details. So these things are one leg of the stool in our efforts to reimagine public safety in Columbus. And I think all of us believe, but I will speak for myself, I know it is not the end of the line when it comes to reforms. In addition to my actions that I'm talking about proposing, as well as other steps we're covering today, we will continue this work not just on the 27th, but through our budgeting process into the fall. And I'm committing to continue the conversation about demilitarization as well. As part of our legislation, we will be asking for increased transparency in terms of usage of these pieces of equipment. That's critical, not only to make these things transparent so that council members understand their usage, but also so that residents do. It's easily accessible, because these are not rules we should write today and let collect dust for future councils. These are the kinds of considerations we should make on a very regular basis. So part of our goal with the reforms of this package is to call for increased transparency in terms of usage of these pieces of equipment. And I recognize that much of the dialogue surrounding policing issues, it has been controversial, but I don't believe our efforts to improve public safety need to be that way. They don't need to be confrontational. I want to end by emphasizing again the amount of public engagement we've heard on this topic. 906 pieces of written testimony, nearly 70 live speakers, hours of conversations with Chief Quinlan and several subject matter experts within the Community Safety Advisory Commission. Add to that literally thousands of emails that I've received, that my colleagues have received. And I will say what struck me most were two factors. First, there is no one opinion on these matters, nor on the path to a better, more just Columbus. There is a wide diversity of opinion and points of view. And then second, and most important, Across the city and spanning nearly every point of view, we are all in search of safe communities for ourselves, our families, and our neighbors. Many of those pieces of testimony and emails have stuck with me. One was with a woman just over the weekend affiliated with a group of police spouses. She wrote to me and said she had a request for me. She said, when speaking to the public, can you refrain from blaming officers for any issue you don't agree with? Instead, can you name the policy you don't agree with and then work to change it with help from experts and officers, residents? She said, officers don't make the policies or laws. They follow them and follow their training. And she's right. I believe that a great majority of our police officers put on their badge because when they envisioned their career, they wanted to serve our community and our residents. I believe there's a system created by all of us, policymakers and residents alike over decades, that falls dangerously short of our goal to build safe communities for all. So that is why we're here. It is up to us to change that system. It is not up to us to play the blame game, but to look at the policies and the underlying system. That work is the work of our generation. I said this at our press conference last month, but this generation of youth is speaking out for a better future, and we have to heed their call. This generation of parents is organizing for the lives and health and safety of their children. And this generation of grandparents is coming together to say, enough, we've been here. We owe it to every family in our city. We owe to every one of them the same opportunity and equality that we want for our very own families. Let's leave Columbus better than we found it. And I believe a more effective police division plays a role in achieving that goal. That is the kind of change we are working towards. If we're for the status quo, we're on the wrong side of history. Thank you, Council President. Happy to take questions about the proposals outlined.
Are there any questions for Councilmember President Pro Tem Brown per the decriminalization legislation that she'll bring forward on Monday?
President Pro Tem Brown, I was curious if you could talk a little bit about sort of that transparency that you were talking about, the usage of some of these tools. You know, you talked a lot about, and I think it's important, how the average citizen would be able to review this kind of information to make sure that it's accessible in a way in which residents feel like they have skin in the game when it comes to oversight.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could talk about whether or not your office or the division has engaged in any preliminary ideas and how that would be accessible to the public.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I will tell you that transparency was a key part of the conversation when I spoke with Chief Quinlan and when I spoke with my colleague, Councilmember Brown. Right now, I'm keenly aware that the division actually has an overwhelming number of reports that they must produce on an annual basis. Our division is asked to report certain things to the state or the federal government or themselves or us, and there's a lot of it. So what we're going to do is figure out a way that doesn't require some, additional huge number of officer hours that's only increasing overtime and increasing costs to produce these reports, but really taking from what's out there and trying to distill this down into an easily accessible place on the Division of Police's website. That's what we are planning to ask the division to do, with sort of a couple key factors when it comes to the use of equipment. And that really comes down to the stated purpose, like the justification. Residents should understand. I think so many of these things, what my experience of working on this is, so many of these things sound really frightening. And residents should understand what about any given threat to public safety, that scenario, what necessitated their use. So that's really what we're trying to get at in requesting these reports. And also it's just a matter of, I think, common sense in this day and age, as technology has improved, that we as a city utilize it better for our residents' advantages. So I'm interested in not just making sort of this request of the police through my legislation, the Division of Police, but also thinking through, I think all of us, part of our next chapter of work is trying to understand how to make that sort of thing really accessible for people, some kind of landing page on police transparency issues.
Councilmember Mitch Brown.
Thank you, Council President. Not a question, but just a point of statement. Yesterday, 2 law enforcement officers were shot, both injured, responding to an eviction notice. And subsequently, our SWAT team, our mobile vehicle, better known as the Bearcat, was requested and responded. And it's important that we keep in mind that we not micromanage the way in which our Division of Police responds and does their job. We hold them accountable, that's without question. But to make certain that they have the tools they need, we must remember we live in a society today where there are over 330 million people and there are over 390 weapons, guns. And we don't, our officers want to go home to their family just like we want to go home to ours. And to provide them with all the tools, all the appropriate resources to make sure that they can have as peaceful an outcome as possible is what I know Councilman Brown wants to have happen. And demilitarizing our Division of Police, as she has already stated, most of the stuff we don't have in the city of Columbus. And if they're going to pursue it, then there should be a process by which they can attempt to try and justify it, if that be the case. But we must keep in mind that we live in a very, very dangerous society right now, again, just because of the sheer volume of weapons. And I don't want a single law enforcement officer hurt, nor does any of my colleagues. Therefore, we have an obligation to make sure that they are protected in any way possible. So again, just a statement. And Councilman Brown, again, knows my feelings about this subject matter. As far as demilitarization, I don't want it, never have, and never will. But I do want them to have the tools they need to get the job done. So
thank you, Councilmember Brown. I think that you make, as always, very valuable points. And if I can take a moment, like a point of personal privilege, just to emphasize that I think we ask our officers to do too much. We've all talked about this. I think probably all of us are on the record publicly talking about how we ask our officers to come into situations as mental health professionals, to come into situations as domestic violence counselors, and that is part of the threat too. And so I am in firm agreement with you that we want every single officer every single night to go home safely to his or her family. And part of that is helping to make sure that they have the right equipment at their disposal and the right soft tools at their disposal, the right kind of system undergirding what they do that allows them to function more safely in communities.
Councilor Brown, absolutely correct. And the use of technology. In order for us to get the proper response for the request made by the citizenry. Yes, whether or not, yesterday was an eviction notice. No one thought that the police officers were going to be assaulted and subsequently put the rest of the community at risk. So we have to exercise good judgment with regards to how we do this. And an officer with someone who has more extensive training in mental health is a valuable component. And we don't want them dressed in camouflage to respond to someone's home. We want them to be appropriately educated and provide the necessary resources from when they have to get engaged. So the demilitarization component is super critical. And again, I am totally supportive.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate your guidance and North Star on these issues.
Councilmember Faber.
Thank you, Council President Harden. I just want to acknowledge both Councilmember Brown's remarks, but also to bring into light that much of this conversation around reimagining public safety derived out of the protests. And the fact remains that a large part of demilitarization and the use of certain pieces of equipment did not meet our expectations as council members. And so I appreciate Councilmember Liz Brown's approach to this conversation, almost surgical to an extent, to ensure that we are protecting our residents' First Amendment right to assemble and to use their voice to speak out when necessary. And militarized equipment has no place in that. And so I just want to say thank you for the work that you and your team have done, and look forward to continuing all of these efforts after the break. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Great.
See, I guess I don't have a question either. I would just give my appreciation for the hard work. And this is for each one of these pieces of legislation. I think I've talked to each one of my colleagues who's leading a piece of legislation combined for hours now, the last a week. The one thing that I would say about demilitarization in particular is that this set of tools that we are classifying as demilitarization, you can ask, we have 900 and some thousand people in our community, and you can ask each one of them what over militarization is, and we would have 915,000 different answers. And so I think that it is an important exercise for this council to put forward our statement, our values as a city of what we think is overly militarized, as we talked about what we expect in our communities. And so I think that that's an important process to go through, because the truth is, to Councilmember Mitch Brown's point, we still have to make sure that our police officers are well equipped and kept safe. And so, there are going to be votes for things other than the things on this list that I will support, that some may still feel are militarized and some won't. But they're going to be based off of best judgment, still tough questions. Just because we didn't put something on this list doesn't mean that we're not going to heavily scrutinize and engage with, like we do all the time. But this is an important value statement from our community, and really not even from council, from our community, about what we think and what we believe should not have a place in our city. And so, one of the tougher conversations. So I tip my hat off to you, President Pro Tem Brown, but certainly an important piece of this short-term legislative package.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Councilmember Faber. Is that true? Yes.
Yes.
Next on the agenda is Councilmember Faber to discuss her work on hate group background checks.
Thank you, Council President Harden, and to Chair Mitch Brown. Thank you all to my colleagues here at City Council for the great work that is taking place to address each of these topics that are critical to public safety. I also want to acknowledge and thank our residents who have joined this journey alongside of us to lend their voices and thoughts to reimagining public safety in Columbus. Over the past couple of weeks, I have taken up the charge of developing hate group affiliation legislation that will update our background check process for police recruits, establish a hate group prohibition, and require new and current police officers to sign a morality clause. This legislation was inspired by the work of Columbus resident Austin Owens, who submitted a draft ordinance on this topic, as well as recommendation number 37 from the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission that stated the following: require a signed morality clause for all officers that requires officers to agree to equal protection for all citizens, to denounce any cultural supremacist groups, and to report any officer's malfeasance to internal affairs. At last week's hearing on the topic, we heard from Professor of African American Studies at The Ohio State University, Dr. Judson Jeffries, about the history and cultural supremacist groups in our country and why it is critical that we ensure anyone chosen to protect and serve our communities are doing so without conscious biases towards people of color or any other marginalized groups of people. Over the past week, as we've debated and began to piece together this legislation, we received several important questions. How will we define a hate group? How do we define affiliation? Are we adopting the Southern Poverty Law's definition and list of hate groups? What is the course of disciplinary action for current officers accused of being affiliated with a hate group? Is the City of Columbus violating the First Amendment rights of city employees? All these questions are extremely important and ones that I continue to work with leaders in the corresponding city departments as we continue to navigate this process. The current working definition of hate group means any group formed that based on its official statement or principles or the statements of its leaders that advocates and practices hatred, extremism, hostility, or violence towards members of a race, ethnicity, nation, religion, disability, gender identity, or sexual orientation. Subsequently, our current definition of affiliation means donating, being a member of, or participating in activities such as meetings, rallies, or social media. The background check process for recruits needs to address these items, and we will begin working with the Civil Service Commission to update the current background standards that would dismiss any candidate with this type of history. Prior to Monday, I will have conversations with Chief Quinlan and his team, as well as other stakeholders to see this piece of legislation through. Our goal with police is to look at opportunities in the current oath, code of ethics, and the chief's directives to add the morality clause that would denounce any hate group affiliation and ask officers to proactively report said violations. This is not a simple process, and I want to take a moment to thank my team, Tynesha Harden, Charles Newman, Nia Walters with our Legislative Research Office and the Columbus City Attorney's Office for all of the work you all have done and will do to ensure this thing is done right. I will be sharing more in the coming days. This work is complicated, but too important not to move forward. I'm happy to take any questions if you all have any. Thank you.
Questions or comments for Councilmember Favor? It's funny, I said at the last piece of legislation, decriminalization, that might have been the hardest piece or toughest piece to get through. I might actually take that back, but it really underscores how tough all of these issues are and how much work each council member is putting into this. Councilmember Favor, would you mind sharing more about some of the, because you have this intersectionality where you're an attorney, you're also a Black woman, you also have these concerns. Could you give us just a little bit of what you're trying to reconcile and what you've been not struggling with, but the nuances of this difficult conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And if General Counsel Laura Baker Morris is still on with us, I'll have her respond as well. Yeah. But the First Amendment protects not only speech, our right to say what we want to say, but it also protects our freedom to associate with whomever we would want to associate with. And so a lot of the hurdles that we're trying to work around right now is that freedom of association. And to some degree, there is not one definition of hate group that we as the City of Columbus can point to and say that works directly for us. There are some folks who are very supportive of the work that is done by the Southern Poverty Law Center, but there are others who do not agree with their definition of hate group or groups that have been added to their list of hate groups. And so what we're trying to reconcile is how are we defining hate and hate affiliation as a city of Columbus? Who makes that determination? How will groups be added to a list? Who will maintain that list? And so we're continuing to parse through those processes to answer those questions, those legal questions, to ensure that we are not infringing upon our employees' rights to speak and to gather and to associate with those who they want to associate with. General Counsel Laura, do you have any additional comments you'd like to make on the subject?
Councilmember Favor, you did a very nice job of laying out the concerns. The First Amendment is, of course, designed to allow individuals to speak and to associate with individuals that we might be offended by. And while there are legitimate concerns for individuals who are exercising power and exercising the ability to take and arrest individuals and having affiliations that might deviate from the City of Columbus's desired, use of force and desired way of treating people, we still have to be mindful of the fact that the First Amendment goes pretty far. There are some concerns about how you define what a hate group is. There are concerns about would you have too large of a net such that you would capture in groups in that net that maybe not appropriately be there. How would an employee know that the group that they're affiliating with would be deemed a hate group by the city further down the line? What does it mean to be affiliated? The question that came up, let's say that you grew up in a family and that your family members were affiliated with a known hate group. Let's say it's as horrible as the Ku Klux Klan. Are you affiliated with them because they were your parents? These are questions that are very difficult, very hard to legislate and very hard to assure that we are both protecting our citizens from individuals who have been given a lot of power and authority, but by the same token, making sure that we're allowing our employees to exercise their constitutional rights. I wish there were an easy answer, but the answer is that there isn't. And it's something that the more time and more thought that's given to it, the better to assure that we strike that appropriate balance.
Thank you. Thank you both. Are there any other questions or comments for Councilmember Favor? President Pro Tem.
Thank you, Council President. Council Member, I just want to add my gratitude to you for digging into this complex issue. And I think it's a reminder of when we talk about the First Amendment and our duty to uphold it, it is very complex in doing that. And I know that First Amendment, the First Amendment has sort of come out of our mouths so many times as we've been talking about this protest movement. But respecting and upholding the First Amendment comes in all forms, and it really is our duty to do it. And yet at the same time recognize, just as you beautifully stated in your explanation, at the same time to recognize that these kinds of affiliations, you've said this multiple times, racism has no place in policing, and these kinds of affiliations are far too common across our country. But where we have to worry about hate group affiliation, it is within public safety, because that's the city doesn't employ everyone in the city of Columbus, but we happen to employ over 800 officers. So I really appreciate the complex work that you've done and have pledged to continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And we can't have it just our way, right? If I'm going to advocate for the right to be able to protest, I have to also advocate for one's ability to associate and to speak freely. But there are certain things that we are trying to prohibit, and if it impedes your ability to objectively do your job as a police officer, then quite frankly, we don't want you as a police officer with the city of Columbus. And so that's what we're trying to get to, the heart of that right there. And so doing that legal dance, if you will, is complicated, but we're going to keep working at it. And General Counsel Laura is probably tired of me right now, and that's okay. We're just going to keep pushing it, and the work doesn't stop. I don't, if Council President, if I'm all right to say that,
Please.
the work doesn't stop after Monday. This work is going to continue on long after we do our package on Monday, and especially when it comes to this specific situation, because there's a lot of different departments that have to coordinate together. Lastly, what I will say is that we don't have an affiliation like this, a prohibition like this for all employees for the City of Columbus. And so I look forward to working with Director Brandon and ensuring that this prohibition is citywide. We're focusing right now on our officers, but the reality is that people from all walks of life and all departments are affiliated with organizations that we would not speak kindly of as representatives for the City of Columbus. So, yeah.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So yeah, and again, we appreciate it. We stand willing and ready. I know that there are you have many more hours of conversations the rest of the week, and so however, and for the public, know that this is really what we say, that we were going to be transparent about policymaking. This is what it looks like. This is digging deep. This is having the conversations, talking back and forth to council members, talking to administration, talking to members of the public. And so that's what we want to bring you today from as pertains to hate groups. Let's see. I think our final piece of legislation that we're going to speak on is going to be on no-knock warrants, and that has been led by Councilmember Remy. Councilmember, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Council President Harden, and thank you to Chair Mitch Brown for his work with me on this important piece of legislation, my council colleague team, for all the work that they put in on the various pieces of the legislation. We've had a lot of conversations, and they've been very eye-opening, very much something that has enlightened us on the complexities of all of these issues and the work, the hard work that it takes to really take reform into account. I'd also like to thank my staff, Jeff Carter and Lucy Frank, our LRO team, specifically John Oswald and Matt Erickson, for all of their help in crafting this piece of legislation. I'm grateful to be here to share in this moment as we continue the work of making history in the City of Columbus. For months now, even longer in some instances, we have been talking about issues surrounding the use of no-knock warrants in subsequent raids. What we have seen in other cities is something we cannot have here in Columbus. I think it's important to say the name of Breonna Taylor, because the name Breonna Taylor is going to save lives. After the senseless murder of 26-year-old Breonna Taylor on March 13th by Louisville, Kentucky Police Department, who were carrying out a no-knock raid, it was critically important that we engage the community and did so transparently on this discussion as we evaluate the use of no-knock raids right here in our own backyard. In fact, we have engaged a number of entities and individuals regarding issues seen locally and across the nation relative to no-knock warrants. We have incorporated some of this feedback into the proposed policy. Some of the entities and individuals that we have engaged and sought feedback from are Columbus residents via a public hearing we held last Thursday, July 16th, which is also available on Facebook and YouTube, the Columbus City Attorney's Office, our local judges. And we have taken cues from the public via verbal and written testimony. We've talked with neighborhood leaders, the Department of Public Safety, FOP leadership, officers, commanders, deputy chiefs, and of course, the chief. These are all important conversations as we understand the importance of having the ability of a tool like a no-knock warrant in extreme circumstances, but also in the situation that we found over the past year, 331 warrants that were served. 92 of those were no-knock warrants, many of which did not turn up nearly what they had suspected, and certainly in a few cases, there was nothing at all. So what we are proposing is tighter tighter measures around no-knock warrants and defining what we do as a city in relation to warrants overall. And we're proposing under City Code Title 19, Chapter 1912, the following. Section 1912.01, the use of no-knock warrants limited. No division of police officer or any other employee of the Department of Public Safety shall seek, execute, or participate in the execution of a no-knock warrant at any location within the Columbus corporate boundary for reasons of suspecting the commission of a fourth-degree felony or lesser offense, or for any suspected possession of marijuana. No division of police officer or any other employee of the Department of Public Safety shall seek, execute, or participate in the execution of a no-knock warrant at any location where there is intelligence indicating or suspicion of the presence of minors within the premises. A division of police officer or any other employee of the Department of Public Safety may seek, execute, or participate in the execution of a no-knock warrant only with the prior approval of the chief of police. And I do want to take a moment to talk a little bit about where this has come. Currently, it had been, they could go to a lieutenant and get that type of warrant, as far as the approval goes through the process. There was a proposal to the deputy chief level, and we got the chief to agree that only he can sign off on those warrants. And so the ultimate accountability will lie with the appointed chief of police by the mayor, and certainly we appreciate that type of accountability. The execution of any no-knock warrant must be preceded by no less than 2 hours of surveillance of the address sought in the warrant immediately prior to the execution of the warrant. So we're going to make sure that these places are properly surveilled and that there is a great understanding of what's happening prior to the execution of a no-knock warrant. The rest of the ordinances, section 1912.02, will talk about this. Any division of police officer or any other employee of the Department of Public Safety charged with the execution of any search warrant shall be accompanied only by such other persons as may be reasonably necessary for the successful execution of the warrant with all practical safety. Before entering the premises, any officer as identified in subsection A of this section shall executing any warrant other than a no-knock warrant shall physically knock on any entry door to the premises in a manner and duration that can be heard by the occupants, clearly and verbally announce as law enforcement, having a search warrant in a manner that can be heard by the occupants, and absent exigent circumstances, wait for minimum of 15 seconds before entering the premises. The next section is we believe is about utmost transparency, and that is the use of body-worn cameras by our SWAT team and our INTEC units. All division of police officers present in the execution of any search warrant shall be equipped with an operating body-worn camera. The next talks about the timing, which this language is actually less than what the policy is with the department itself and the public safety. The public safety, according to the chief, leave the body cameras on until the entire investigation is wrapped up with the particular subject. Most of this language that I'm talking about right here came from Louisville itself. The next section talks about the retention of the records being in line with the public safety department's policies. And finally, these this particular section on body-worn cameras will be in place effective December 1st in order to properly outfit the SWAT and INTAC teams. But I did get the chief's commitment that any no-knock warrant moving forward, there will be officers in the front and the rear of the warrant wearing body-worn cameras so that there is a level of transparency starting immediately. We're currently reviewing all the final pieces to this legislation. We do need a few additional approvals, such as the city attorney's office, but it is nearly final. It's just not completely final. I read the proposed language because I feel it is important to be as transparent as possible with this policy. And certainly, we will most likely see a piece of legislation this Monday to approve the body-worn cameras in addition to the one that's on the agenda already. to make sure that they are properly outfitted so that there's the highest level of transparency for these officers moving forward. The chief is committed to using seizure funds to make that possible. And so I truly appreciate his willingness to work with us to make sure that we had a policy that takes 92 no-knock warrants down to what we believe to a couple a month. So with that, I will turn it over to Council President Harden and ask if anybody has any questions in regards to this particular piece of legislation.
President Pro Tem.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify to make sure I heard correctly on the body worn camera issue. You have an immediate requirement for at least some officers to wear them. And then the December 1st requirement kicks in for all officers. Is that across all of SWAT or on all of SWAT and INTAC or on just no knocks? How is that phrased?
Okay, good question. Thank you so much, Council President Pro Tem Brown. It is for all SWAT and INTAC officers, whether they're executing a regular warrant or a no-knock warrant. The compromise, since they aren't outfitted currently and there's some uniform issues with it fitting properly, the compromise was that every no-knock warrant moving forward from this point there would be some officers that would at least have that recording available on any no-knock moving forward from this point forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to hear that about December 1st. I think that's really critical that you included that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, again, I appreciate all the work that my colleagues have put into this. It's certainly been good to speak with our officers, understand how this policy is used. I know, speaking with a lot of our community leaders who have benefited from these types of warrants within their own neighborhoods and ridding their neighborhoods of drug houses, we certainly appreciated their feedback as we talked more thoroughly about this. It's been trying times, obviously, and certainly we understand from all perspectives what people's viewpoints are, but we certainly want to make sure that in the most extenuating of circumstances that our police officers have this tool in their toolbox to use. We feel that the particular requirements to execute these types of warrants has been substantially upgraded. The chief is also committed to providing monthly reports to us so that we can further review this policy as we're moving forward. And so we'll keep an eye on it and make sure that what we're doing here is of the highest and best practices throughout the nation. The bar was already higher in Ohio, much higher in Ohio than it was in Kentucky. But certainly we wanted to make sure that Columbus's policy is one of the best in the nation as it relates to this. So with that, thank you, Council President Harden. That's all I have.
Certainly want to, again, thank you, Councilmember Remy, thank Chairman Mitch Brown for his work, and your staff, and all those folks that went into writing this piece of legislation. Let's see. I think that we are now at the public testimony portion of this agenda. So let me find speakers. All right. At this point, we'll move into the public testimony portion of the agenda. I'll ask or remind folks to please state their name and any organization that they may represent, and remind folks that they have 3 minutes to speak. Our first speaker is Scott McManus. Is Scott on the line with us?
I do not have a Scott listed on WebEx, sir.
All right. The next speaker public speaker slip that I have is Eric Tate.
Hello.
Eric?
Yes.
Welcome. Just a reminder, you have 3 minutes, and if you would state your name and any organization. Welcome to council.
Sure. My name is Eric Tate. I don't have any specific affiliation, and I wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to voice my opinion in regards to this much needed civilian review board. I watched in horror along with other citizens as the CPD frequently used excessive force and deployed chemical agents against citizens, elected representatives, and journalists during the protests against police brutality in our city. I've been astonished when police unilaterally declared peaceful protesters simply chanting on sidewalks with no violence or property destruction, quote, no longer a peaceful protest, unquote. A civilian review board is long overdue because in the weeks since we saw CPD officers abuse their authority and public trust, we have seen no transparent disciplinary action against any of the officers who committed these actions in plain view of the public. A closed system for reviewing officer conduct is not transparent to the citizens they protect, is not a real review system. It's an illusion. I make the following recommendations so that this review board can be effective and would hope that if these specific suggestions are not taken up, similar measures be implemented. 1, in order that this review board be effective, they be empowered to strip an officer of their authority as a police officer, and in the event a contract with the police union or other legal impediment means the review board cannot fire an officer for abuse of their power, they must be able to take that officer off the street so that CPD can only use them in an administrative capacity. Any officer that can't be trusted by this board to not use excessive force, not racially profile citizens of this city, an officer that abuses their authority or otherwise is not able to act in a manner beyond reproach should only ever be employed by CPD for the sole purpose of filing paperwork or moving heavy objects from one office to another. If you fail to empower a civilian review board with the authority to take action against an officer who kills an unarmed subject, brutalizes peaceful protesters, or further damages the public trust, and allow FOP or CPD administrators to put that officer back on the street with a badge and a gun, then you've done nothing at all except further damage public trust. 2, this review board must be truly a citizen review board. No member of the board should have served in law enforcement or be related to a law enforcement in any capacity. The entire reason for this board to exist is because the police have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they cannot be trusted to hold themselves accountable. It took the arrest of a high-profile adult film actress to expose a corrupt vice unit. I think that says enough about the internal affairs of CPD as well as the priorities of FOP to prove that we can't trust them to hold their own accountable. Now, that's not to say that the board can't contain lawyers, legal analysts, or other familiar with police protocols, but a civilian review board made up of retired CPD officers will be about as effective as a backstop against the abuse of power as the FOP, and they haven't done much to hold their own accountable. These 2 measures are key towards affecting real change. If we don't affect the real change, we let the Columbus Police Department become nothing more than a taxpayer-funded militia that is responsible to no one. Thank you for letting me speak. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Are there any questions for Mr. Tate from my colleagues? Questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. The next speaker to come before council is Carl Watkins. Is Carl Watkins with us?
I do not see Carl Watkins listed in WebEx, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Angie. The next speaker to come before council is Greg Coulis. Is Greg with us?
I'm with you. Can you hear me all right?
I certainly can. Just a reminder, if you could state your name and if you're affiliated with any organization, and that you have 3 minutes.
Certainly. My name is Gregory Coulis. I'm a retired Columbus Police Lieutenant. I spent a significant portion of my career working in helicopter operations as an officer, a pilot, and later as the unit supervisor. I'm here to convey information to the public regarding the significant public safety contributions that result from the work of the police helicopter operations. Although the helicopter operation is assigned to the Division of Police, their work results in a wide range of public safety applications that go far beyond their primary law enforcement mission. The aviation operation is, in fact, a much more expansive public safety initiative than most people realize. It's one of the most versatile public safety tools available. While major events make the news, it's often the more daily occurrences that contribute to public safety in ways that are not widely recognized. I'm reminded of the injury accident where the woman was trapped in her vehicle. We recognized from the air that the rescue squad had been given the wrong location and was having problems getting to the scene. The woman had severe blood loss, and by directing the rescuers, the response time was greatly reduced. Her life was saved, and she continues to send cards to us at the police department many years after. I recall finding a young 5-year-old boy who was missing. He'd been gone for hours. There was a search party frantically looking for him. We located him in a cornfield just after dark. He was returned uninjured to his family. What we routinely called blood runs were regular events. Blood or emergency supplies needed at one hospital were flown there from another hospital in just a matter of minutes. I recall a fire in a factory in Columbus's south side. We were able to use our infrared imaging to locate the heat source and directed the fire department to the source of the electrical fire. A domestic disturbance. Officers didn't get an answer at the door. With no additional information, they began to leave. Moments later, we observed a man carrying a woman from the garage to a car. She'd been badly beaten. We directed officers accordingly. The woman survived and the man arrested. I've got many more examples, but not enough time to include them all. No discussion would be complete without mentioning vehicular pursuits. As a patrol officer, this was always a dreaded situation. It's a choice between two bad things: risk allowing a criminal to escape by vehicle or engage in a dangerous pursuit. With the helicopter overhead, we don't have to do either. The vehicle can be followed from the air until the positioning allows for safe intervention. We'd routinely respond to needs from fire department, as well as multiple federal, local, and state agencies, Secret Service, FBI, DOT, CODA bus supervision. During my time there, we responded to about 25,000 calls for service per year. At that time, the basic operating costs amounted to approximately $17 for each call for service. So careful considerations are necessary. For each hour that public safety aircraft are not airborne, critical incidents may have a very... So I will conclude at this time. I would like to ask you to please take the time to tour the facility, talk with the staff, have them show you videos, explain their operation. You have my promise that it will be time well spent, and it will give you a great viewpoint of how diverse that this public safety tool is. It's incredible. People can't believe it until they see it. So I'd like to thank you for your time. I'm here for any questions. I'd also make myself available as a resource for council at any time that you wish. I've been involved in this industry for a long time.
Certainly. Is your rank, sir, lieutenant? I can't.
Yes, I'm retired lieutenant.
Lieutenant, thank you so much for your service. Maybe Chairman Brown has done this, but I had the opportunity to do a fly along several years ago with our unit. So as part of a lot of the discussions that we've had over the last month, it has been really understanding the usage of the helicopter in when appropriate and when not. And I've certainly heard many stories as you have expressed. But thank you for your testimony. I think I'm going to ask council members if they have any questions or comments, starting with President Pro Tem.
Thank you, Council President. And thank you, sir, for calling in. I don't know if lieutenant is the proper title for me to still address to you, though retired, but I will say thank you, Lieutenant, for calling in and for your service. And I really appreciate you highlighting those things about the helicopter unit. I think that the vehicular pursuit, I was remiss in not including that in my comments. It is one thing that is dangerous for residents and dangerous for officers that our helicopter fleet allows us not to have to engage in. That's critical. And then of course, in some of these very high stakes situations. So that's really why what we're trying to do is balance the use of helicopters in part because, I know we can measure arrests that are made through use of the unit. We can't measure, or at least we don't have an easy measurement for the psychological cost of when the helicopter is flying too low for too long over a neighborhood. And I do understand that in pursuit of public safety, not all things are perfect and that exists. But what we want to try to do is create that balance between what is necessary for securing public safety and what can be done differently to help promote the health and safety of our residents. And then the additional component there is what I know will be cost savings. We have to make sure that we have to spend money to keep people safe, and we are obviously not afraid to do that. But that money has to be spent in a judicious way, because there are so many priorities that our city has to support our residents and build thriving communities. So that's the balance we're trying to seek with the helicopter unit. And I do just really appreciate you calling in and talking about your personal experience. It matters very much. And thank you for the additional perspective.
Lieutenant, are you still online? We still have other council members who have any questions.
I'm certainly I'm here as long as you want me to be.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Remy.
Thank you so much, Council President Harden. Thank you, Lieutenant, for your service. We really appreciate it, and certainly your perspective here today. I mean, I think many of us realize after speaking with people within the division, and certainly understanding what the response times are using the helicopters in the city, is it's a complex issue. And so one that requires probably hearings and investigation on our own to really understand the complexities of it. And so look forward to that type of work moving forward so that we have, again, a best in class helicopter unit that makes the most sense for the community that it serves. And so, again, looking forward to really diving into that, taking those invitations up on actually going out, taking a look and talking with the officers currently. And so I'm fully committed to do that. Thanks again for calling in.
May I provide one more? I think it address some questions that Councilmember Elizabeth Brown has. So it's meaningful to me because it was my very last patrol flight, and it occurred about 2:00 in the morning. And we simply went on a disturbance call. Patrol was sent where some restaurant employees called in and said there was a man refusing to leave and they were trying to close. We got overhead, we observed a man walking away from the restaurant. By the time the patrol officers got there, they discovered that both employees in the restaurant had been shot. We still have the man in sight. And yes, we were circling over the city, and yes, there were searchlights in people's backyards. And I have no doubt that for somebody that didn't know what was occurring, that could possibly be an annoyance, particularly that late at night. He was going over fences. He was going through backyards. We kept him in sight. We directed the apprehension without further incident. And again, 25,000 calls for service a year at my time there. So what starts out to be a simple event turns out to be very complicated. And I certainly understand your concern for the residents, but this is a versatile public safety tool that is available in all kinds of situations, not just some select rare occurrences. So I'd like to thank you very much for listening to me. And by all means, if I can be a resource to you at any time, I'm there for you.
I would ask Lieutenant if we could get not publicly right now, but if you could maybe shoot me an email so that I can share it with the council members, your contact information at sgharden@columbus.gov. That way, as we deliberate over the next several days and even going past whatever we do on Monday, I think your testimony and your insight is very helpful.
I absolutely will do that, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker to come before council is Gianna Jenkins. Is Gianna on the line?
I'm sorry, sir. Gianna is not listed in WebEx.
Thank you, Ms. Angie. The next speaker that we have before council is Rennie Davis. Is Ms. Rennie on the line?
Is that me?
Yes, that's you.
Sorry, Shannon. By the way, I'm Rennie Das. Thank you, council members, for showing the leadership and compassion. And I want to also thank the council staff. I cannot thank them enough for being accessible and also very responsive to any of the thing over the last few weeks. I wanted to actually revisit two of the things that I want to talk about. One is in spirit of transparency. one of the things that we can do with respect to the police union is I noticed that they have 3 different tax entities. One is their 503C, and the other one is 504C, which is related to the PAC and the foundation. There is financial transparency associated with that, but with regards to their C5 status, there is absolutely no transparency for public to understand who are their members and what they're donating. And we can probably, the city should consider an ordinance by which they can publicly record or give a report of who their donors is and who are funding them as far as their operations goes, especially the unions that have employees in public safety. So that is one point that I want to make. The other point that I want to make, and this is where I express complete ignorance because I do not know if these things are in place, but I repeatedly heard that double overtime was being paid to police officers during this coverage, as considered as hazard play during the coverage of the protest. There has to be, either somebody has to look at it and see how incentives and economic incentives play, what triggers, these overtime incentives that bring all these police officers to work, and what impact it is having on regular citizens when hazard pay is associated in taking care of protesters. And I don't know whether that is true or not, but that is what I've heard repeatedly, that the police officers were getting paid that way. The second part of the incentives that I want to talk about is related to conflict of interest. I do not know if the CPD has a conflict of interest statement that they all sign in, but I've also repeatedly heard examples where police officers leverage their badge to get free rent by acting as a security officer in their apartment building. They leverage, free food from restaurants. I know this sounds petty, but this has become a big issue during the COVID-19, where certain restaurants were giving them a half-price discounts. So all of these pecuniary and non-pecuniary, and all the side hustles that they're doing by leveraging their badge, typically rest of the world cannot do that because they all sign conflict of interest. So I do not know whether that's such a thing exists, but that is something, again, incentives, keep in mind incentives change behaviors, and incentives is what motivates people in how they do things. So those were my 3 points that I just wanted to bring forward, and I appreciate the opportunity. And I do again want to thank the council staff if I haven't thanked them enough.
Thank you, Ms. Rennie. You've been really engaged with us, and I appreciate your engagement, certainly over the last month, but even before then.
And if you need any help with any of these incentive mechanisms, that's my life work, data and incentives, so I can help with that.
I appreciate that. Do we have any questions or comments for Ms. Rennie Duss? I think Chair Brown may.
Council President, I think Deputy Director Stone should speak to the issue with regards to special duty and speak to the issue with regards to officers receiving any kind of gratuity or acknowledgement because of their badge. So Chief Stone or Director Stone?
Councilmember Brown, Council President Hardin, Council Pro Tem Brown, and council members. The Division of Police has rules and regulations in place, and in reference to special duty, officers are required to get prior approval before they're able to work special duty at any establishment, including an apartment complex. So those rules are very strict. In reference to the other part of your question, sir?
It was about overtime.
Overtime. Officers, due to the protests, there were officers that had to work overtime, and that would have been time and a half. It is possible that some officers may have been on their first day off canceled, and that would have been time and a half. I'm not aware of people getting double overtime, but there was a situation where we needed to call in resources to make sure that the city was safe from property destruction and also physical violence.
Thank you, Deputy Rivera. I just thought it was important to try and provide clarity to the individual's questions. And I think, Council President, if she would like to get some more specifics, she could certainly provide, make the request to Public Safety and they can answer her question.
Certainly, I'll make sure that that connection is made.
Thank you.
The next speaker to come before council is Trent Calloway. Is Trent with us?
Can you hear me?
I can. Welcome to council. Just a reminder, if you would state any organization you may be with, and you have 3 minutes for your testimony.
I'm not with any organization. My name is Trent Calloway, resident of Columbus. I'd like to call attention to something that happened in Columbus the other day. There was a shootout in North Columbus, rather, that lasted 7 hours and ended with 2 officers that were wounded. It was committed by a middle-aged white woman, and she was taken safely away. I believe she was charged with 2 felonious assaults. Meanwhile, back in December of 2019, during a police entrapment sting, Julius Urban Tate Jr. Was murdered by a Columbus police officer. His girlfriend, who was with him, Masonique Saunders, she is currently in jail for his murder at the hands of a Columbus police officer. I would like to know why it is white women who shoot police officers get led away by the Columbus Police Department safely to jail, yet young Black men are murdered. Further, Masonique Saunders is still currently in jail as a part of a plea deal to avoid being tried as an adult. It was her only option, really, that would see her serving 3 years in jail as opposed to potential life. That is a precarious situation for her to be in during our current pandemic. There's no reason she should still be in jail, and she should be able to serve out a portion or the rest of her sentence under house arrest or at home. Further, I would ask that any recommendations for the Civilian Review Board, they should be radical and unique to Columbus. I've been going over a list of other cities that have Civilian Review Boards, and all of them are appointed by the City Council. So I would ask, and I think others would ask, that we have an elected Civilian Review Board. I think that is important to the citizens of Columbus, that they get to choose the people that will be deciding what recommendations and potential disciplinary measures that officers should face. Second, I would say that either during the next negotiating session with the Fraternal Order of Police, or if that renegotiation happens, that we strive for the ability to indict officers, that we strive for the ability to call criminal defense hearings, grand juries against officers. That is something no other city currently has, and I think Columbus could be a leader in that, in having a more powerful and more Civilian Review Board than any other city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Trent. Thank you, Mr. Calloway, for your comments. I think the points that you made are why we're here, why we're having this conversation around reimagining public safety. Some things that you talked about, we correctly stated, are part of the negotiation, and by putting forward the Civilian Review Board structure, I think it strengthens our position as we go into that negotiation to make sure that we have a strong Civilian Review Board with independent oversight. Are there specific questions or comments for Mr. Calloway from council? Chair Brown.
Again, Council President, I think Director Stone can speak to, or have Mr. Calloway contact the Department of Public Safety, and they can speak to the issue with regards to the circumstances of force that was used yesterday and the circumstances involving the individual that he was discussing earlier. Race did not necessarily play a part in the decision on how to handle yesterday's circumstance. It was a lady with a gun, and fortunately, nobody was hurt seriously beyond the police officer. But I think to give him some additional clarity, he should have an opportunity to speak to someone in public safety, and they can answer his question.
Thank you, Chair. I will say quickly about the Masonique issue. I do think that the law that allows for that type of case is archaic, and I had conversations with the prosecutor, Ronald Bryan, at that time of this case, and so we will hope. And those felony cases are in that law is not something that is in the purview of the city of Columbus. It's a state consideration. So just want to make that point personally, and I'm not speaking for any other council members. Just and I'm not an attorney either, so neither one of my attorney colleagues scowled at me for my own perception of that law. But thank you, Mr. Callaway, for calling in. The last speaker to come before council is Timothy Boggs.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Timothy Boggs. Like you just said, I don't represent any group in particular, just coming on my own. I've emailed everyone this week, and I sent a letter you guys probably have in front of you or somewhere near you right now. But as I listen to you guys talk, I actually want to address something different, which I think is probably the most concerning thing that everyone's brought up today, is Councilmember Favor's idea of, looking at my notes, a morality clause for city employees, starting with the cops, which begs the question, whose morality? Is it city council's morality? Is it Christian morality? Is it Muslim morality? Is it Black Lives Matter morality? And so these things don't all go along with each other. So the difficulty in requiring a morality test for city employees is going to get everyone into very, very hot water very quickly. Is the Christian idea about homosexuality being a sin preclude one from holding the position of a police officer? What about the Orthodox Muslim view of that gays should be killed? Or what about the Black Lives Matter idea that the Western nuclear family should be dismantled, or that the patriarchy should be dismantled? Are you guys going to get into these deep of questions when deciding who can and cannot be a city official or rather employee? And so this is very, very concerning to me whenever the government is the one who writes the morality, because keep in mind, you guys won't always be in power, and today's morality is gone tomorrow. The morality 100 years ago is not the one we hold to today, and the morality 20 years from now is not going to be the one that we hold to today. So these are sticky issues, one that I would warn you guys against adopting, because no one in the history of man has been able to answer these things. If somebody is an out-and-out racial hater, that's one thing. But the Southern Poverty Law Center, as Councilmember Favor brought up earlier, has faced a lot of opposition. And the Southern Poverty Law Center calls any Orthodox, Christian, or Catholic a hate group by the sheer fact that they disagree with the homosexual lifestyle. So these are sticky issues. I'm sure you guys know that they're sticky issues. I know you guys aren't trying out to eliminate Christians from holding public office. But this morality clause, I think of everything mentioned today, and I'm all for police reform. I'm all for eliminating no-knock warrants. I live on the south side of town, and we're dealing with a lot of crime right now and a lot of shootings, stuff that's not fun. But of everything mentioned, this morality clause is going to be the sticking issue. And I know that Councilmember Favor has seen that, as there's been countless national media articles that I've seen, and I referenced one in my email to you guys, that are talking about this very specific issue. It smells of a religion test, which our Constitution explicitly prohibits. So that's the main thing. Just want to bring it up for a topic conversation. I appreciate you guys' time today. This has been a good experience. I appreciate you doing this for the public. Thank you.
We're right on time, sir. Are there any questions or comments? I see Councilmember Favor.
Yes, and thank you for your emails and your testimony today. I will just say that I've been very very clear that I do not believe that Our definition will be that of what SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, has defined as hate group affiliation. I think that is incumbent upon us as representatives of the City of Columbus and residents to help inform that definition of what constitutes a hate group. And as it relates to that, both that definition and that morality clause has to be narrowly tailored in order to avoid the very issues that you brought up here today, sir. And so when we're speaking about morality, it's purely in the context of denouncing hate groups and enforcing equal protection for all citizens. That's what I mean when I'm speaking of just being narrowly tailored to focus in on that. We are not trying to infringe upon anyone's right to a religion, association, anything of that nature that you spoke of today. But once again, you have highlighted the crux of the hurdle that we're facing as we continue to parse through this legislation. And so I truly do appreciate that comment and that feedback. We have a lot of work to do, but please take some comfort in knowing that I'm not trying to copy and paste what SPLC has done.
Thank you, Councilmember Favor. Any other comments from my colleagues? Before adjourning this hearing, I would like to provide my colleagues an opportunity to give any closing remarks, and then I'll close things out, starting with Safety Chair Brown.
Thank you, Council President. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my colleagues and their staff and the Legislative Research Office for their presentations and work this afternoon. All their efforts in attempting to try and re-image public safety. I'd also like to thank Mayor Ginther, City Attorney Klein, and the Department of Public Safety, and Chief Quinlan and the Columbus Division of Police for collaborating with us in this effort. I believe that each of these 4 initiatives speak to our community's vision for a division of police that works for them. I support the effort to ensure our Columbus Division of Police does not become militarized. There's certainly a need for specialized equipment in circumstances that endanger the public or our officers, but there should not be an over-reliance on this equipment that calls into question the public's trust. I stand with the community in having high standards for members of our public safety forces and believe there is no room for hate group affiliation in our Division of Police, Division of Fire, or within any area in the City of Columbus. I support the efforts of Mayor Ginther, Council President Hardin, and Councilor Dorns to create a civilian oversight and investigative entity within the City of Columbus. Recognize that this is hard work. It is not easy. If it was easy, it would have been done a long, long time ago. Our residents need to have direct engagement with the process that holds their officers accountable for misconduct. Finally, I believe there needs to be a substantial limitation and supervision of the use of no-knock search warrants to ensure our community never sees a tragedy like the loss of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. We have grave responsibility as council members to not only hold the Division of Police accountable to the demands of the community, but to keep our residents safe and healthy. While the items presented this afternoon are a strong start, it is imperative that we devote our time and energy to supporting the members of the Division of Police and Chief Quinlan, certainly the members of the public, to create a city and a division that reflects our values and can serve as the gold standard for providing public safety to our residents. I've been asked by Council President Hardin to give some of my personal experiences involving public safety, given my history. And I'm going to leave you with one in particular. I've trained and been responsible for over 1,000 police officers in the Columbus Division of Police. Upon graduation, in a private ceremony with me, I would always remind them of one thing. If you come in contact with a good-looking black bald guy, it might be me. That's all I have, Council President.
Thank you, Chair. I looked up and saw Craig Stone, and he looked mostly bald from my camera. So
But he's not good looking.
all right. President Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, Council President. I will be very brief just to thank my colleagues for the time that they've each spent with me talking over all of these issues, including my package and the hours you spent on the June 30th hearing. And I also want to thank Safety Chair Mitch Brown for spending so much time with his team and my team talking through the critical perspective that you bring, sir. And then I'll just end by kind of repeating what I said earlier, which is that it's up to all of us, policymakers and residents alike. We are responsible for the system that underlies what we ask our peace officers to do. And we ask them to do the job of keeping us all safe. We have created a system over time that needs reimagining, and policymakers can address this. I am encouraged and grateful to be a part of the work with each of you, my council members, and also just very appreciative of the consistent and ongoing resident engagement. It has been humbling. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Pro Tem. Councilmember Dorns.
Thank you, President Hart, and to my colleagues who I know and their staffs and our research office that have spent countless hours not only working with council and our council colleagues, but our friends in the mayor's office and certainly the city attorney as well. I just wanted to say that this past month has been the most deliberative process that I certainly have been a part of during my time on council. And I don't mean that just in the sense of working with my colleagues. I mean that in the sense of working with the community. When I mentioned a number of times the thousands of emails and calls that we've received about the very important topics we were talking about here today, I've tried to read and internalize as many of those as I possibly could. And to take the messages that folks sent, both positive and negative, about their feelings about these very critical issues, to impart upon the work that we're doing right now. And we set a very ambitious agenda at the beginning or at the end of June about the things this council would take up in a short-term package, while also with the expectation of a long-term conversation around reimagining public safety, primarily around the budget and other issues. I wanted to thank the public for being part of this deliberative nature of this body. And I'm excited about where we are right now with balancing the need for reform with ensuring that officers have what they need to do their job safely. And look forward to Monday night for some of these pieces of legislation to be on our agenda and to take votes. And then for council to return this fall to continue this conversation with everyone in the community. So I appreciate the folks who are engaged here today, the folks who've been engaged for years on these issues, and the folks who will be engaged this fall as we move towards the future. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Favor.
Thank you, Council President Harden, and to Chair Brown. Thank you for allowing us to jump into your territory and work alongside you as we reimagine public safety. This is a very personal subject for me, and as chair of Criminal Justice Committee, I look forward to continuing this work after Monday. And so for all of our residents who have been engaged with us so far, I invite you to continue to participate in this process. Please continue to send your ideas, your feedback. Reform should not happen in a vacuum. It's truly going to take all of us coming to the table and presenting ideas, solutions to problems that have existed long before anybody that's a part of this council ever even thought of being a member of Columbus City Council. And so my true appreciation to everyone with City Council, our Legislative Research Office, the Columbus City Attorney's Office, the directors who have stood alongside with us over these 20-ish hours of public hearings. Thank you very much. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Favor. Councilmember Remy.
Thank you, Council President Harden, and of course, thank you, Chair Brown. Your years and years of experience is something that we rely on very heavily, and we know that you're the good-looking bald guy in the room, but certainly appreciate your insight in your many different roles as it relates to safety over the years. This work was extensive this month, but really it's only the beginning. We have so much more to work on and to partner with our sworn officers, our peace officers, as we think about what policing looks like in the city of Columbus in the future. I am proud to be over, the chair of administration and civil service as we roll into negotiations with the FOP on their contract, and certainly when we look at the process to get the right type of candidate here in the city of Columbus, we want to make sure that we're focusing our efforts so that the police force ultimately reflects the community that it serves. And so we know that we'll have much more extensive work ahead of us. Look forward to taking that work on, and certainly appreciate the work that's transpired so far with my colleagues. It's fortunate that we have a group of people that work very well together, that value each other's opinions, and certainly respects each other mutually. And so I'm always proud to look at our body as a whole as one that's very collaborative and understanding of each other, even when we don't always agree. So thanks much, and look forward to passing legislation on Monday.
Thank you, Councilmember. And finally, I would say that I echo much of what my colleagues just mentioned. First and foremost, the appreciation of Chairman Brown for his engagement and support. I've always thought of him as a rudder to council to make sure that we're heading in the right direction, and specifically with his background in public safety, understanding that we are in a historic moment, and we are going to have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable nature of change. And he has really been open in these conversations, and I just appreciate him and his leadership, and all of my colleagues. Some estimate that the past 2 months represent the largest social movement in our nation's history. This is a time when political possibilities have shifted, and it is because of those protests. We would not be here without the protesters. So a month ago, what we didn't believe could be done, I believe can be done now. And so this Monday we will vote, but I don't want folks to think that we've checked all the boxes and we're done. This safety package, like many have said, is just the beginning. This fall, Council will put forward a community engagement process to begin reimagining public safety leading into the 2021 budget. I said a month ago that I was interested in radical change, doing things that have never been done before in our city's history. On Monday, we'll vote to put a charter amendment before voters that would establish a first ever civilian police review board. We'll vote on new policies and systems that our city has never seen before. I'm proud of what this council has done over the course of just 4 weeks. And we've got a lot of work still ahead of us. Before closing, I'd like to read a short quote from John Lewis' book, Across the Bridge. This is something I said the other day. It really sticks out to us and really frames the moment that we're in. He writes, "Freedom is not a state, it's an act. It is not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we all must take and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair, more just society. I want to thank you all for your engagement, for your many, many written testimonies, for your calling in and speaking with us. With that, this meeting is adjourned.